Hello, everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin.
I didn't notice her at first, and that's the part that still bothers me the most. When I moved into the duplex on Harrison Avenue just outside Toledo, Ohio, I was focused on survival more than observation. I was 29, newly single, freshly transferred for work, and exhausted in a way that sleep didn't fix. The place wasn't great. Thin walls, mismatched carpet, a faint smell of old wood and cleaning chemicals. But it was affordable and quiet, which was all I wanted. The woman next door had been there longer than me. I knew that because the landlord mentioned it casually while handing me the keys. "She keeps to herself," he said. "No trouble." At the time, that sounded like a blessing. For the first couple of weeks, I barely saw her. Occasionally, I'd hear her door open or close or footsteps on the shared porch, but our schedules didn't overlap. I worked unpredictable hours at a logistics office near the rail yard, sometimes early mornings, sometimes late nights, and when I was home, I mostly stayed inside. The first time I really noticed her was a Wednesday evening in early fall. I stepped outside to grab my mail around 6:40 p.m., and her door opened almost immediately. Not slammed open, just opened, slowly, like she'd already been standing there. She didn't come out. She just stood in the doorway, watching me. She was maybe in her mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back too tight and a gray sweatshirt that looked worn thin at the elbows. Her face was neutral, not unfriendly, not curious, just observant. I nodded politely. She nodded back. Then she closed the door. That should have been the end of it, a coincidence, shared timing, nothing strange. Except it kept happening. Every time I stepped outside, she appeared within seconds. Sometimes she'd come out to water the small strip of dirt near her side of the porch, even when it had just rained. Other times she'd just stand there pretending to check her phone, glancing up whenever I moved. I told myself I was imagining patterns because I was alone too much, so I tested it. One Friday night, I put my shoes on and grabbed my keys like I was leaving, but instead of opening the door, I stood still. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. 10 minutes. Then I opened the door suddenly. Her porch light clicked on instantly. Her door opened. She stepped out this time, smiling faintly. "Heading out?" she asked. Her voice was calm, casual, like this was completely normal. "Yeah," I said, even though I wasn't, "just running an errand." She nodded, satisfied, and went back inside. That night, I locked every window. A few days later, I noticed something else. From my kitchen window, I could see into part of her living room when her lights were on, and one evening while heating leftovers, I caught movement. She was standing near her window, holding a notebook. She wasn't writing. She was looking at me. Not directly, more like at the space where I stood, as if she knew exactly where I'd be. I stepped back from the window slowly, heart pounding, and waited. When I checked again, she was gone. The next morning, I found a note taped neatly to my door. No name, no greeting, just 5 words written in careful block letters. "You got home late." That was it. No punctuation. I didn't call the police, not yet. I didn't even tell anyone. What would I say? That my neighbor noticed my schedule? But the notes kept coming. One under my doormat, one slipped through the mail slot, each one specific, accurate. "You leave early on Mondays. You don't turn your lights on right away. You should close your blinds." The final note was waiting for me one night when I came home after midnight. "You can hear you pacing." That was the night I packed a bag and left. I never went back for the rest of my things. 2 months later, I drove past the duplex out of morbid curiosity. The unit next door was empty. The porch light was still on. The next morning, I went to work like I hadn't slept at all, because I hadn't. I sat at my desk with my email open and my hands hovering over the keyboard, pretending to be normal while my brain replayed those 5 words over and over. "You can hear you pacing." It wasn't the note itself that scared me the most. It was how calmly it was written, like she wasn't trying to threaten me, like she was simply documenting a fact. And the worst part was, it was true. That night after I'd read it, I had paced. I'd walked from the kitchen to the living room and back again, trying to convince myself there had to be another explanation. Thin walls, creaky floors, coincidence? Except the duplex wasn't that thin. Our unit shared one wall, sure, but the hallway and the porch separated the doors. You couldn't hear someone pacing unless you were trying, unless you had your ear to the wall, or unless you were somewhere you weren't supposed to be. I didn't go home after work that day. I drove to a 24-hour grocery store and sat in the parking lot with the engine off, watching the darkened windows of my car reflect my face back at me. My phone sat on the passenger seat, heavy with the option of calling someone, anyone. But who do you call when your fear sounds stupid out loud?
Eventually, I went to a hardware store and bought 2 things I told myself were reasonable precautions: a cheap indoor security camera and a new deadbolt. That night I installed both. My hands shook the entire time, the screwdriver slipping in the grooves because my palms were sweaty. The camera faced the front door in the living room, plugged into an outlet near the floor. When I finally crawled into bed, I left the camera app open on my phone, volume turned up, brightness low. I slept in fragments. Every time a car passed outside, I woke up. Every time the old building settled and popped, I sat up in the dark, listening. At 2:13 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might throw up. I tapped the notification, expecting to see someone in my living room, but the footage showed nothing. The front door didn't move, no shadow crossed the floor, the curtains didn't shift, just empty space and the faint reflection of the TV screen. I watched the clip 3 times, still nothing. Then I noticed something small, so subtle I almost missed it. The doorknob. It didn't turn, but it twitched, like someone had touched it from the outside and tested it gently, careful not to make noise, careful not to commit to the turn. I sat there in bed staring at my phone until my eyes burned. The next morning, I checked the porch. There were no footprints, no scuff marks, nothing obvious. But the welcome mat I kept outside my door, the cheap kind with fake palm leaves printed on it, was slightly crooked, only by an inch or 2, but I was the kind of person who always straightened it without thinking. Someone had moved it. And then, sometime later, they'd tried to put it back. That afternoon, I finally did something I should have done earlier. I talked to my landlord. He was an older guy named Russ who owned a few properties around Toledo. He picked up on the second ring and sounded annoyed until I said the words, "security concern." Then he got quiet. "What happened?" he asked. I told him about the notes, the timing, the camera alert. There was a pause long enough that I could hear the faint hum of traffic on his end. Finally, he said, "She bothering you?" "You know her?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "She's particular." That word made my skin crawl. "Russ," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "is her name even real?" Another pause. "I don't know," he admitted, and the casual way he said it was worse than a lie. "She pays rent, she keeps the place clean, doesn't cause damage, doesn't throw parties. I don't get involved." She's watching me. She's leaving notes about my schedule. Russ sighed like this was inconvenient for him. I can talk to her. No, I said quickly, too quickly. Just tell me if anyone's complained before. He didn't answer right away, and that was my answer. Look, he said finally, voice lower now. I had a tenant in your unit last year. Guy didn't last long, broke lease early, said the same kind of stuff, said she was obsessed. Obsessed.
Like I was a hobby. What did you do? I asked. I gave him his deposit back and found the new tenant, Russ said, like this was a normal business solution. I felt my throat tighten. So you knew. I didn't know, he snapped. I heard complaints. People complain about neighbors all the time. Then he softened, but only slightly. Just keep your door locked. Don't engage. She'll get bored. As if boredom was the only thing standing between me and whatever this was becoming. That night, I didn't turn on any lights when I got home. I stood inside my darkened entryway and listened, trying to hear anything through the shared wall. Nothing. No footsteps, no TV, no music. Just silence. I went to the window and pulled the curtain back a fraction, careful not to let the fabric rustle. Her living room was dark, but her porch light was on, and her front door was cracked open, only an inch, just enough to see the slice of darkness behind it, just enough to tell me she was either leaving it open or watching through it. I backed away from my own window slowly, like movement itself might provoke her. I checked the camera feed. Nothing. I checked the locks twice. Then I sat on my couch in the dark and waited. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe an hour, maybe two. My phone showed 11:58 p.m. when the first knock came. Not a loud knock, a soft one, like fingertips. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. The exact same pattern every time. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't urgent, it was patient. I didn't move. The tapping stopped. Then, after a full minute of silence, I heard something else. A whisper. So faint I wasn't sure at first, but it threaded through the gap beneath my door like smoke. I know you're awake. My entire body went cold. The whisper wasn't right outside my door. It was closer than that. It felt like it came from the wall, like she was pressed against the shared space, mouth near the seam, speaking into it. I stayed frozen, barely breathing, and then, very softly, like she was just sharing a secret, I can hear your heart. That's when I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the bag I'd packed days earlier. I didn't open the front door. I went out the back. I didn't turn on a single light. I didn't even shut the back door gently. I just pulled it closed and ran. I drove to a friend's house across town and stayed there the night, sitting on his couch with my shoes still on, too afraid to even fall asleep. In the morning, I checked the camera footage from my phone. There was a final motion clip at 12:04 a.m. The living room was dark, grainy. Then the front door handle moved, slowly this time. Not a twitch, a full, careful turn. The door didn't open, but whoever held it stayed there for a long moment, as if listening. Then, in the faintest edge of the camera's view, a figure leaned toward the door, so close to the peephole that all I could see was a blur of skin and dark hair. And then the figure lifted one hand, pressed something flat against the door, and left it there. A note. When I went back later that afternoon with my friend, broad daylight, 2 of us, phones ready, my front door was still closed, still locked. The note was still there. I peeled it off with shaking fingers. 4 words in that same neat block handwriting. You left too fast. I broke my lease the next day. I told Russ I didn't care about the deposit. I didn't want the money. I wanted distance. I moved into a different part of Toledo in a larger apartment complex where people blended into crowds and nobody could track you with silence. But sometimes, even now, years later, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and realize I'm holding my breath, listening. And if I hear a neighbor's door close down the hallway at the wrong moment, too perfectly timed, I feel that old crawling certainty return. Not that something supernatural is happening, just that someone, somewhere, is paying attention in a way they shouldn't be. And you don't realize how fragile privacy is until it's already gone.
Story 2. The spare key he knew too much about. I was 42 when I moved into the ranch house on Maple Crest Drive in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and by then I thought I had a pretty good sense for people. Divorce will do that to you. You learn to read tone, timing, body language, the little tells that suggest when someone wants something from you. After everything I'd been through, I wasn't looking to make friends. I just wanted a quiet place to live and a routine that didn't surprise me. The neighborhood seemed perfect for that. Single-story homes, mature trees, retirees and young families who waved but didn't linger. The kind of street where nothing ever felt urgent. My next-door neighbor introduced himself the first afternoon I was unpacking. He was tall, early 50s maybe, with thinning blonde hair and a tan windbreaker zipped halfway up even though it was warm. He stood on the edge of my driveway while I wrestled a box out of my trunk, hands clasped behind his back like he didn't want to intrude. "Name's Evan," he said. "If you need anything, tools, ladder, whatever, just knock." It was the most normal neighbor interaction imaginable. I thanked him. He nodded. He walked back to his house. For a while, that was it. We waved in passing, occasionally exchanged a sentence about the weather. He never lingered, never asked personal questions, never came over uninvited, which is why it took me so long to notice the pattern. The first thing was the trash. Every Tuesday morning I rolled my bin to the curb before work. Evan's bin would already be there, lid closed, perfectly aligned with the curb. When I came home that evening, his bin would be gone before mine. Then I switched it up one week, took my trash out late Tuesday night instead. His bin appeared 5 minutes later. I laughed it off. Coincidence. Then there was the garage. I worked from home 3 days a week, and on those days I rarely opened the garage door. But on the mornings I did, usually to grab something from my car, Evan's garage door would open too. Not immediately, just close enough that it felt responsive. Still nothing concrete, nothing I could point to. The moment things shifted was the spare key conversation. I was outside fixing a loose sprinkler head one Saturday afternoon when Evan wandered over. He leaned against the fence separating our yards, watching me work with an expression that suggested mild curiosity. "Smart to keep a spare key hidden," he said casually. I stopped moving. "I don't," I replied. He smiled like I'd made a joke. "Sure you do. Everybody does." "No," I said, standing up now. "I don't." He studied my face for a second, then nodded slowly. Right, my mistake." He walked back to his house without another word. I told myself I was overreacting, that he'd just made an assumption, that I was projecting. That night I checked anyway. The fake rock by the side door where the previous owner had apparently kept a key, it was empty. I'd made sure of that on day 1. Still, I slept lightly.
A few nights later, I came home late for dinner with a coworker. The street was dark and quiet, porch lights dotting the block like low stars. As I walked up my driveway, I noticed something small and wrong. My porch light was on. I never left it on. I stood there for a full minute, keys in my hand, listening. Nothing. When I went inside, everything looked normal. No drawers open, no lights on, no obvious signs of anyone being there. But the air felt disturbed, like when someone has just left a room and the quiet hasn't settled. The next morning, I found my spare garage remote sitting on the kitchen counter. I don't keep it there. I keep it in my car. I stood staring at it, trying to reconstruct some version of events that didn't involve another person. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Your porch light burned out last week. I turned it on so you'd notice." My chest tightened. I didn't reply. An hour later, another message came through. "You really should have a spare key somewhere safer." That's when I called the police. They came, they listened, they walked through the house, they asked if anything was missing. Nothing was. No forced entry, no broken locks, no proof. One of the officers suggested I might have forgotten turning on the light or moving the remote myself. The other advised new locks for peace of mind. When they left, Evan was outside washing his car. He waved. That night I installed new deadbolts and disabled the garage opener. At 3:26 a.m. my phone vibrated. Another text. "That won't help if you lock yourself out." I didn't sleep. The following afternoon I finally confronted him. I walked next door and knocked, my heart pounding hard enough to feel in my ears. It took longer than expected for him to answer. When he did, he looked surprised, but not confused. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I've used your house," I said, skipping every polite step. He didn't deny it. He just sighed, like I'd said something inconvenient. "You shouldn't leave things so predictable," he replied. "What people?" I asked. He smiled, and for the first time since I'd met him, it wasn't friendly. "Neighbors," he said. I backed away before he could say anything else. 2 days later, I moved into a hotel. A week later, I sold the house at a loss. The new owners replaced the locks, the doors, and the garage system. 3 months later, I got a call from the local police department. They'd arrested Evan during a routine traffic stop. They found keys, dozens of them, labeled. I was 24 when I rented the upstairs unit of a converted Victorian house on South Walnut Street in Bloomington, Indiana. It was my first place after college, the kind of apartment you take because it's cheap and close to downtown, not because it feels safe. The building had been split into 3 units, one on each floor, and my neighbor below me was a woman named Lori. She was older than me, maybe mid-50s, and she'd lived there forever, according to the landlord. I only met her once, briefly, when I was moving in. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed, watching me carry boxes like she was counting them. "Your window stays open," she said. Not hello, not welcome, just that. I glanced up at the second-floor window above us. "Yeah," I said, "it gets hot up there." She nodded as if confirming something and went back into her apartment. At the time, it felt odd but harmless. The apartment itself was small but charming, Slanted ceilings, creaky floors, old radiators that hissed at night. My bedroom faced the backyard, and the window really did stay open most of the time because the air inside felt stale no matter what I did. The first strange thing happened about 2 weeks in. I came home late from a friend's birthday dinner and noticed my bedroom window was closed. I never closed it. I told myself I must have done it without thinking, maybe before work that morning. People forget things all the time. Still, I opened it again and went to bed. The next morning, it was closed. This time, I knew I hadn't touched it. The latch wasn't locked, just gently pressed shut, like someone had wanted to keep the noise out, not keep someone in. I started locking it. After that, it stayed open. That should have reassured me, but instead it made me uneasy. The idea that the only thing stopping something from happening was a flimsy latch felt worse than the idea that nothing was happening at all. Then came the comments. I'd see Lori outside sometimes when I left for work, watering plants that didn't seem to need water, or sweeping an already clean porch. And she'd make these small observations that felt too specific. "You sleep with the TV on," she said one morning. "You talk in your sleep another time." Once, as I walked past her on the stairs, she said, "You were up last night. You kept pacing." My stomach dropped. "How would you know that?" I asked. She smiled thinly. "Sound travels." But the floors between our units were thick, old wood. You could hear footsteps sometimes, sure, but pacing, late-night movement patterns? I started keeping notes. I wrote down when I left, when I came home, when I heard noises that didn't belong to me. One night, around 1 a.m., I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, careful. They stopped outside my door. I held my breath, staring at the dark outline of the doorframe, waiting for the handle to turn. It didn't. The footsteps retreated. The next morning, I found a handwritten note slipped under my door. "Your window was rattling again. I fixed it." I called the landlord. He laughed, actually laughed. "She's just lonely, keeps an eye on things, helps out." "She's been inside my apartment," I said. "No," he replied, "she doesn't have a key." That night, I moved a chair under my doorknob and slept with my phone in my hand. At 3:11 a.m., my bedroom window creaked. I sat up so fast I felt dizzy. The latch held, the window didn't open, but something pressed against it from the outside, just enough to test it. Then, very softly, I heard Lori's voice from below. "You should really stop locking that." I moved out the next day. I didn't pack carefully. I didn't clean. I left things behind. As I carried my last box down the stairs, Lori stood at the bottom watching. "You forgot something," she said. I froze. "What?" I asked. She tilted her head toward the window above. "You," she said, "you forgot how quiet it was before you moved in." I never went back. Months later, I checked the listing online out of curiosity. The apartment was advertised as newly renovated. The photos showed my old bedroom. The window was sealed shut. Story 4. The Man Who Memorized Our Schedules. When my wife and I bought our townhouse on Redwood Lane in Plano, Texas, we thought we'd finally done everything right. We were both in our mid-30s, stable jobs, one kid in elementary school, another on the way. The neighborhood was quiet, almost aggressively normal. HOA newsletters, trimmed hedges, people who smiled but didn't pry. After years of apartment living, it felt like safety. Our neighbor across the street introduced himself the first week. His name was Caleb. Late 40s, always dressed neatly, pressed jeans, collared shirts, shoes that looked too clean for someone who claimed to work from home. He stood on the sidewalk while we unloaded groceries, hands clasped behind his back like he was inspecting something. "Just wanted to say welcome," he said. "I like to know who's around me." That phrasing stuck with me, but at the time I brushed it off. For the first few months, Caleb was just present. Every morning when I left for work at 7:15, he was outside walking his dog. Every afternoon when my wife picked up our son from school at 3:05, Caleb was watering his lawn. Every evening when we pulled into the driveway around 6, his garage door would be open. At first it felt like coincidence, then it started feeling rehearsed. The comments came next. "Running late today," he said one morning as I got into my car. "How would you know?" I asked, half joking. He smiled. "You're usually gone by now." Another time, he mentioned my wife's prenatal appointment before we'd told anyone she was pregnant. "You guys are really organized," he said. "Your Tuesdays are always busy." That night, my wife asked a question neither of us wanted to say out loud. "Do you think he's watching us?" I didn't want to agree, so I didn't. The moment everything changed happened on a Sunday afternoon. We were hosting my parents for lunch. My son was playing in the front yard while my dad helped me grill. Caleb stood across the street pretending to check his phone, eyes flicking up every few seconds. At one point, my son ran inside to use the bathroom. Caleb stepped closer to the curb. He's usually back out in 4 minutes. My dad stopped moving. "Excuse me?" he asked. Caleb blinked like he'd said something strange without realizing it. "I mean, kids, right? Routines," he laughed. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. That night, I checked our security camera logs. We'd installed them mostly for package theft prevention, and I'd never really watched the footage closely before. But scrolling back through weeks of clips, I started seeing it. Caleb walking past our house at the same times every day, stopping, looking directly at the cameras, sometimes standing there for minutes perfectly still, not breaking any laws, just watching. I called the HOA first, then the non-emergency police line. Neither could do anything. "He's on public property," the officer said. "Hasn't threatened you." 2 days later, Caleb left a note in our mailbox. "You should really adjust your cameras. There's a blind spot by the side gate." I unplugged them that night. We stayed at my parents' house the following weekend. When we came back Sunday evening, there was another note taped to our front door. "You weren't home Friday or Saturday. Everything was quiet again." That was enough. We put the house on the market within the month.
While we were packing, I saw Caleb one last time. He stood across the street watching the moving truck. Schedules change. People don't like that. We sold at a loss. 6 months later, I got an email from the Plano Police Department. Caleb had been arrested for stalking multiple families, multiple neighborhoods. They found notebooks, charts, detailed logs of routines. Our address was one of the older entries. The officer ended the email with a line I still think about sometimes. He wasn't planning anything specific. He just liked knowing.
I was living alone in a split-level house on Maple Ridge Drive in Eugene, Oregon when this happened. I was 29 at the time, recently divorced, trying to rebuild something that felt like a normal life again. The house wasn't big, but it was quiet, tucked into a wooded neighborhood where the trees grew close to the road and the nights felt heavier than they should. The basement was unfinished, concrete floors, exposed beams, one pull-chain light hanging in the middle of the ceiling. I only went down there to do laundry or grab storage boxes. It always smelled faintly damp, like cold dirt and old cardboard. The neighbors were polite but distant, a couple on one side who kept to themselves, and on the other side an older woman named Marilyn who waved every time I pulled into the driveway. She lived alone too, at least that's what I thought. The first time I noticed the basement light was on, I assumed I'd forgotten it. It was a Tuesday night. I came home late from work, dropped my bag, and noticed a soft glow spilling out from beneath the basement door. I stood there for a second, keys still in my hand, trying to remember the last time I'd been downstairs. Probably laundry, I told myself. I turned it off and didn't think about it again, until it happened the next week. This time I was sure I hadn't gone downstairs. I'd worked from home all day, hadn't even opened the basement door. The light was on again. I checked the breaker panel, nothing unusual. That night I locked every door before bed. A few days later, Marilyn stopped me while I was taking out the trash. "Your basement light was on pretty late last night," she said casually. My grip tightened on the trash bag. "How would you know?" I asked. She smiled. "My bedroom window faces your side yard. I notice things." That made me uncomfortable, but she hadn't said anything threatening, just observant. The light kept turning on. Not every night, not on any pattern I could figure. Sometimes I'd come home and see it glowing. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and notice a faint line of light under the door. I started leaving it off deliberately, pulling the chain twice to be sure. It didn't matter. One evening I decided to test it. I turned the light off, shut the door, and taped a small piece of paper across the frame so I'd know if the door had been opened. The next morning the paper was torn. The light was on. I didn't sleep much after that. I set up a cheap motion camera at the top of the basement stairs. It wasn't great quality, but it would at least alert me if someone went down there. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th night, my phone buzzed at 2:13 a.m. Motion detected. I stared at the notification for a full minute before opening the feed. The video showed the basement stairs. The light was off. Then, slowly, the pull chain began to sway. No hand, no body, just the chain moving back and forth, and then the light clicked on.
I didn't go downstairs. I called the police instead. They searched the house top to bottom. No signs of forced entry, no extra locks broken, no footprints in the basement dust. One officer suggested an electrical issue. The other asked if I'd been under stress lately. They left after about 20 minutes. The next day, I installed new locks, changed the garage code, put another camera facing the basement door. That night, the light stayed off. So did the next. I started to calm down, started sleeping again. Then, one afternoon, I came home early and noticed Marilyn standing near the fence between our houses. She looked startled when she saw me. "Oh, you're home," she said. "Yes, I am," I replied. She hesitated, then said, "The light hasn't been on lately." I felt my chest tighten. "Why are you paying attention to that?" I asked. She shrugged. "Old habits." That night, I went into the basement for the first time in weeks. I needed to see if anything felt off. That's when I noticed the footprints, dusty shoe prints leading from the basement window to the stairs. The window was cracked open. It had never locked properly. Behind a stack of storage boxes, I found a folding chair, and beside it an extension cord running to the light socket. Someone had been sitting down there, watching. I moved out within 3 days. Later, I learned Marilyn had been arrested after another neighbor reported someone crawling out of their basement window. She'd been breaking into houses through crawl spaces for years, not stealing, just sitting in basements, turning lights on.
Story 6. The Man Who Knew When I Wasn't Home. I moved into a small rental house on Cedar Bluff Court in Knoxville, Tennessee at the beginning of spring. I was 41, recently separated, and working long hours as a medical billing supervisor. My schedule wasn't consistent. Some days I left before sunrise. Other days I worked late and came home after dark. That unpredictability was supposed to be a benefit. At least, that's what I told myself. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly older couples, lawns trimmed, no kids running around. The kind of place where nothing really happens. That's where Evan lived. He was 2 houses down, mid-30s maybe, always wearing athletic shorts and a hoodie no matter the weather. The first time we met, he waved from his driveway while washing his car. "New neighbor?" he called out. I nodded. We exchanged names. That was it. Over the next few weeks, I noticed something small. Every time I pulled into my driveway after work, Evan was outside, not always doing the same thing, sometimes taking out trash, sometimes checking his mail, once just standing with his phone in his hand like he'd stepped out mid-text. At first it felt normal, coincidence. Then I realized something else. He was never outside when I wasn't home. On my days off, when I stayed inside all afternoon, I never saw him. No car noises, no door opening, nothing. But the second I left the house, especially at night, I'd see him later when I came back, always acting like he'd just stepped out. I started paying attention. One evening I left at 6:12 p.m. to grab groceries. When I returned at 6:41 p.m., Evan was outside, locking his front door. "Long day?" he asked casually. I hadn't told anyone my schedule. The next week, I changed it on purpose. I left my house at 10:30 a.m. on a weekday, then parked a block away and walked back through the trees behind the houses. I waited. Nothing happened for almost an hour. Then Evan's front door opened. He stepped out, looked directly at my driveway, and frowned. He stood there for a full minute, scanning the house. Then he went back inside. My stomach dropped. That night, I noticed my porch light was on when I got home. I never leave it on. The following morning, there was a folded note tucked under my doormat. It wasn't threatening. That's what made it worse. It just said, "Thought you forgot to turn the light off again." I installed a camera the next day. 2 nights later, it caught something. At 1:17 a.m., Evan walked onto my porch. He didn't knock. He didn't try the handle. He just stood there, staring at the door. Then he reached up and flipped the porch light off. I didn't call the police. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I found muddy footprints beneath my bedroom window. And inside my house, the chair from my kitchen table had been moved, just slightly, like someone had stood on it. I checked every lock before I left for work that morning. Front door, back door, windows, the latch on the side gate. Everything was secure. Still, the chair being moved bothered me more than the footprints. Mud could be tracked in accidentally. A chair meant intention. Someone had stood there for a reason. That night, I didn't go straight to bed. I turned off all the lights and sat on the couch in the dark, watching the camera feed. Around 12:40 a.m., a notification popped up. Motion detected. Front porch. My heart rate spiked instantly. Evan stepped into frame. He wasn't wearing shoes this time, just socks, dark hoodie pulled tight around his face. He stood close to the door, so close his breath fogged the lens for a second. I watched him tilt his head slightly, like he was listening. Then he whispered something. The audio didn't pick it up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. For one terrifying second, I thought it was a key. Instead, he held it up to the door frame and made a quiet clicking sound. Once, twice, testing. Then he stopped, looked directly at the camera, and smiled. I didn't sleep at all. The next day, I called in sick and stayed home. Curtains closed, lights off, every noise making my shoulders tense. At noon, someone knocked on my door. I checked the camera. It was Evan. He had a grocery bag in his hand. I didn't answer. He knocked again, lighter this time. "I think one of your packages got delivered to my place," he called out. I stayed silent. After a minute, he set the bag down by the door and walked away. I waited an hour before opening it. There was no package inside, just a single light bulb, the same wattage as my porch light. That was when I called the police. They came out that afternoon, took my statement, reviewed the footage. One officer frowned when he saw Evan staring into the camera. The other asked, "Has he ever threatened you?" I said no. That's the problem. They went to Evan's house. I watched through the blinds as they knocked. No answer.
They waited, knocked again. Finally, Evan opened the door. He smiled the same way he had at the camera. The officers talked to him for about 10 minutes. I couldn't hear what was said, but Evan gestured calmly, hands open, nodding like a reasonable person. When they came back, the officer sighed. "He says he's never been on your porch," she said. "Claims the footage must be someone else." "Someone who looks exactly like him?" I asked. She hesitated. "We can't act without a direct threat or a crime." That night, I slept with my bedroom door locked. At 3:06 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Motion detected. Backyard. I opened the feed. Evan was standing by the tree line behind my house, not moving, just watching the back of my house for almost 10 minutes. Then the feed cut out. When it came back on, he was gone. The next morning, my internet was out. So was my power. Only my house. I packed a bag and left. I stayed with my sister across town for 3 days. When I came back with a friend to grab more things, my front door was unlocked. Nothing was missing, but on my kitchen table, neatly placed, was my spare key, the one I'd hidden in my car. I never went back alone. I broke the lease and moved out within the month. Before I left for good, I drove by the house one last time. Evan was outside, watching. This time, he waved.
I moved into a second-floor apartment on Briarstone Avenue in St. Louis, Missouri at the end of summer. I was 33, newly promoted, finally earning enough to live alone without roommates. The building was old, brick exterior, narrow hallways, floors that creaked even when no one was walking on them. It had that constant background noise of pipes ticking and air moving through walls. I told myself that was normal. My unit shared a wall with one other apartment. The man who lived there introduced himself the first night I moved in. His name was Caleb. Late 20s, soft-spoken, glasses. He stood in the doorway holding a mug like he'd been waiting for someone to knock. "Just wanted to say welcome," he said. "Walls are thin. If I'm ever too loud, let me know." That struck me as considerate. The first week was quiet. Then I started noticing the sounds. It wasn't loud music or shouting. It was smaller things, subtle. When I brushed my teeth at night, I'd hear a sink turn on next door. When I shut my bedroom door, I'd hear a door shut through the wall a second later. At first, I thought it was coincidence, old building, shared plumbing. Then, one night, I dropped a fork in my kitchen. It hit the tile with a sharp clang. From the other side of the wall, something metallic fell. Same timing, same sound. I froze, fork still in my hand. A few minutes later, I heard a laugh, soft, muffled, like someone trying not to be heard. The next morning, I ran into Caleb in the hallway. "Sorry if I woke you last night," he said casually. "I tend to be up late." I hadn't told him I'd been awake. It's fine," I replied, but my stomach felt tight. Over the next few days, the pattern became impossible to ignore.
when I paced my living room while on phone calls, footsteps mirrored mine through the wall. When I paused, they paused. When I sat down, silence followed. I tried testing it. One evening, I stood still in my bedroom for a full minute. No sound. Then I snapped my fingers. On the other side of the wall, fingers snapped back, once, perfectly timed. I didn't sleep that night. I told myself it was just someone messing around, a neighbor being weird, maybe even trying to joke. But it didn't feel playful. It felt rehearsed. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. Sorry if the walls make things awkward. I hear everything too. No name, no handwriting I recognized. I started playing music softly to mask noise. That's when it escalated. If I turned the volume up, the music next door turned up slightly louder. If I turned it down, his did too. Always just enough to stay present, always just enough to remind me he was listening. One night, I whispered into my phone, pretending to talk to someone. "I think my neighbor can hear me," I said quietly. From the other side of the wall, I heard a whisper back, "I can." I dropped my phone.